It's about to get much harder to watch pro cycling in the UK. GCN, gone. ITV, gone. Eurosport, gone. As the execs laugh all the way to the bank, how long will it be until the cycling scene in the UK is gone as well? Warner Bros. Discovery has just announced they're replacing Eurosport with TNT Sports in the UK and charging you an eye-watering sum of money in its place. They say that they're investing in cycling and creating value for money, but it feels a lot like they're taking pro cycling away from the fans and the only value being added is to their bank accounts. So we're going to explain what's happening, why Eurosport is closing, and what that means for the elite cycling scene in the UK. Now, before that, I have a confession to make. We run Monument Cycling TV, a small streaming platform for the British scene. But the difference between us and WBD, apart from like $40 billion in revenue, is that we're privately funding small-scale coverage that doesn't exist yet and doesn't have sponsors to pay for it. Whereas what's happening to the Tour de France is free coverage of the world's biggest cycling event being taken away for profit. What this does mean is that we have a unique insight into the broadcast and streaming world, which is what I'm going to distill for you now. With that out of the way, I want you to understand the three big players in this story. That's TNT Sports, Eurosport, and Discovery Plus, and how they all lead back to Warner Bros. Discovery. WBD is one of the world's biggest entertainment companies, housing franchises like Friends, like DC Comics and Harry Potter. They own Eurosport, TNT Sports, and Discovery Plus. They have joint ventures with BT, with the NBA, and with PGA. This is a Goliath with stakes in almost every major sport in the world. In 2024, they decided to consolidate their many assets into a streaming division and a linear networks division, and unlock additional shareholder value in the process. Ugh. For you and me in the UK, that means a steady march from the days of paying small subscriptions for GCN, for tennis, or for whatever you want to actually watch, to paying more for one big streaming package, a bit like cable. That leads us to where we are now. Eurosport will no longer be available in the UK, and instead, in order to watch World Tour races and the Grand Tours, you will need a subscription to TNT Sports costing a ridiculously high £31 per month. So what does this mean for the British scene? First, it may seem crazy to say, but an almost tenfold increase in annual subscription fees is going to make the sport less accessible for new fans. We all love the same sport here. Being able to share an experience, such as watching an iconic stage race or witnessing a British rider win the Tour de France, brings people together and offers a sense of community. But don't just take my word for it, take the European Broadcasting Union's own research instead. They say that sport is a core part of public service media content on television, and specifically that free-to-air coverage can encourage participation at grassroots level. Remember how we used to watch the Tour de France on ITV4 for free? You're not the only one. That's how Ned Boulting got into the sport. It's how David Miller remembers watching the Tour, and it's what inspired Teo Geoghegan-Hart to become a pro. Back in October, ITV4 didn't renew their broadcast rights, and guess who licensed them from the EBU instead? Yup, the big dog, WBD. The golden age of cycling in the UK started with the rise of Team Sky in the Tour de France, peaked with Wiggins' win, the London Olympics, and Chris Froome's dominance, till live domestic coverage ended around 2020. This rise took British cycling to their highest membership levels ever, from 30,000 members in May 2010 to 150,000 members in 2019. And you can trace this growth all the way back to free coverage of exceptional British performances at the Tour de France and the biggest races in the world. Teo recently said that we want and need to remain available to all of the huge British audience that has been built up over the last 15 years of astronomical success. Putting a high fee as a barrier to even watch the sport will mean that the community that's built up around elite cycling in the UK will fracture and struggle to bring in new fans. And what about the elite domestic racing scene? With the Tour de France and World Tour no longer being broadcast for free, it will significantly decrease the viewership of the biggest events, and as a result, fewer people will be aware of domestic cycling competitions. For example, when the TV rights to cricket's test matches in England and Wales were sold in a similar deal with Sky in 2005, the viewership of the Ashes dropped from 8.4 million to 900,000. And that resulted in a 35% drop in the number of people playing cricket. Without that free coverage of the biggest events, you lose the first touch point that gets most people into the sport of cycling. Look, I'm not crazy. I know that people usually hear about the Tour de France before the Cambridge Criterium. So we have to work within that framework on the domestic scene. But don't worry though, because Warner Bros. Has thought about that. Remember Scott Young? He highlights Eurosport's YouTube channel and social media accounts as a replacement to free live coverage to engage the younger population of cyclists. And in fact, one of Eurosport's commentators, Rob Hatch, said in an interview with Cyclist magazine that society has changed. Kids don't watch telly, they watch YouTube, and the algorithms will push people to TNT Sports cycling. This is one of those things that feels like it could be partially true, but when you look at it, I think the viewpoint really misunderstands algorithms and the competition for attention on social media versus linear TV. The viewing figures on YouTube speak for themselves, they're way lower. Average Rob has more views on his Paris-Roubaix video than the actual race highlights, and it's a big stretch to say that social media can replace free-to-air live coverage when it comes to creating fans. Okay, what about sponsorship and the knock-on effect there? I want you to imagine what that drop in viewership means for the teams and races in the UK with a stat from our friends over in Europe. In 2022, an average of 1.2 million people watched the Tour de France on Germany's public service network, ARD. In comparison, Eurosport only pulled in 235,000 viewers. That's a huge difference. Sponsorship of domestic events comes from a healthy cycling industry and British cycling scene, where companies are inspired to get involved and support the domestic scene in much the same way that fans are. If companies aren't seeing the top level of racing, they won't be seeing the potential gains that sponsoring domestic cycling events could bring, and there'll be a fifth of the fan base that there could be. As a result, they won't engage with the elite British scene, and we could see events and teams suffering or potentially closing down. Finally, I think we should look at the precedent this sets for major cycling events in the UK like the Tour of Britain and the National Championships. Warner Brothers Discovery has shown they want TNT Sports to be the one-stop shop for cycling in the UK, which means there's a chance these races go behind a paywall in the future. Traditionally, major events in Britain have been free to view on ITV4 or BBC. In 2021, the Tour of Britain organisers announced that 2.6 million viewers tuned in across the race, mostly on ITV4's free broadcast. Or take the 2022 National Championships, which had 349,000 views on free-to-air broadcasts versus 62,000 on Eurosport. Look, if TNT Sports offers British cycling a large sum of money to gain exclusive rights to their major events, they have to take it. I won't blame them, because they need the cash to guarantee the events can run. But if the Tour of Britain goes pay-to-view, then the biggest shop window to get domestic audiences interested in the sport disappears as well. And those sponsors I just mentioned, they'll be getting a lot less value for their money. Not only will this mean the future of the British racing scene is at risk, but the next generation of professional cyclists might never arrive. Riders like Teo won't see the spectacle that is the Tour de France or the Tour of Britain on their TV screens, meaning they'll never be inspired to have a go at racing themselves. The Tour de France has always been the biggest driver of public interest for cycling in the UK, and people could watch it for free or attend in person, which would lead to them becoming a fan of the sport and gaining an interest in the domestic scene. So, with Eurosport closing, what does that mean for the cycling scene in general in the UK? Fans won't have an equal opportunity to get involved with the sport. Sponsorship deals and the next generation of British pro cyclists are at risk. Free-to-view coverage of the world's biggest races brought a shared sense of experience and a gateway to becoming fans of the sport. Taking this away proves a massive threat to how cycling can grow in the UK. Well, what a cheery video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is TNT Sports paywall for live cycling a good thing or a bad thing? That's all from me. I'll see you next time.